recording button has gone gray.
I got
there we go.
It is.
So now we are recording. Thank you, folks, for hopping on here. I'll go ahead and monitor the chat in case anyone else joins the other link. But thank you all for joining. Reminder that this conversation is not under NDA, and it will be recorded and shared later on. I'll be managing the chat thread, relaying questions to Matt as much as I can. And Matthew, go ahead and take it away. Let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah, sure. So hi, folks. This is the despite what the banner says, this is the 46th Service Fabric Community Q&A, or seventh maybe even. One of the things that we wanted to talk about was we're talking about making the community calls more structured. Part of that is a call out to you folks in the community. If you have topics you want to have covered, if you have demos or cool things you want to talk about, you can submit those, and we'll be starting to structure things so that you, the community, get more time to talk to each other, as well as hearing from us. This is mentioned in the blog post for this community call. So if you want to have more information about what we're thinking about, go ahead and read that. And we do encourage you to tell us if there's specific deep dives you're interested in, or demos of cool stuff that you want to give. Even we've done it before in the past in the community calls. Some folks from SoCreate talked about a dynamic cache that they built, but we're trying to make it more structured and kind of firm up the agenda so that it's not just me rambling at you. It's more purposeful. That said, we're definitely not aiming to lose anything about the community calls. We've already done Q&A has been kind of the big part from day one, and we want to keep it that way. So something to think about. And there is a survey to take. So if you're interested in influencing, the design or the pattern of the community calls from here on, go ahead, pop in there, take that survey, and let us know what you're thinking about. Other things of interest. I guess we did do a refresh recently. That was probably right around the last community call. That was a refresh to 7.1, new update. That was request drain and a few other things, mostly re-enabling automatic upgrades for clusters that had opted into that. There will, of course, always be more refreshes, more updates coming out. We encourage you to, let us know of issues you're finding, or try out new features and give us feedback. I have seen the request drain used by some folks. One of the things that we got as feedback to that, and as feedback to some of the other recent health probe functionality, was that some of it was container only, and we got feedback that people wanted it to be able to apply to regular services as well. That's work that we have taken as feedback, taken as a good design idea, and we're thinking about how to introduce that. Containers are a useful abstraction for this sort of probe stuff because they have this very clear boundary, particularly with Docker and Containerd, where they have these known endpoints for reporting container health or readiness. And so we did it first there because that's kind of a table stakes thing for containers. But we want to extend it to regular services, both services, guest XEs, and things that use Service Fabric's SDK. Currently, the proposal that we have that we're drafting up, we want to try and do that by kind of the end of the calendar year. So you'd see it in the October, November timeframe. If you have any feedback or additional comments on that functionality, we'd love to hear it. so, we got the feedback initially that, doing it just for containers was not, what people were looking for, but well, it was what some people were looking for, let's be clear, but that it didn't work for all scenarios. And so now we're trying to design and have feedback around what does it look like for normal services or services that are using the guest-XE model. Something to be aware of. The other thing that we're talking about is being clearer about our release schedule. Currently, we were on kind of a monthly cadence where we would be trying to do a dot release every month or two. And in practice, what that turned out to be was a release every about 3 months. Once we got feedback taken in and things stabilized, we're going to be trying to move to kind of I keep jokingly calling it Intel's old TikTok model, but it's not. But basically, 2 major releases a year with constant updates kind of in between. And the goal of some of this is to provide better information and better communication around what capabilities are landing when. That's something that we know that we haven't been as good at. And so I would say continue to pay attention to the GitHub page. We're going to be trying to dump more information about release schedules and updates about what features or functionality is shipping in what release there. We're also going to hopefully resume updating source code there as well. We realize we've been behind on that. I'm disappointed because I use the public code to demonstrate capabilities or show off new features or debug things with customers. And so we're really hoping to get back to regular updates on GitHub. Also, those of you that are maybe been at this a little bit longer will notice that we used to have one repo which was just issues and the other repo which actually contained the code. And that we've, in the last few months, converged that. So they're all one place now. So the issues and the code are now back in one repo. Similarly to wanting to get back up to date with the code, we're also starting to think about ways we can use the public comments, the issues list, and any PRs that people have made. We're trying to figure out how to do better there. The team has really recognized that there's a lot of good comments and feedback in the issues list, and that we haven't been doing a good job. Most people have been sitting more in Stack Overflow and other forums like the tech community site, and that we want to do better meeting you kind of where you are and meeting you close to the source. So we're brainstorming some ideas about how to get the processes sorted out. Because we are such a used thing inside Microsoft, there's still an internal bug database that we have to pay attention to. And so we're trying to figure out ways for our own sanity to track, comments and issues that you make on GitHub, as well as, bugs and issues and work that we have to track internally. Ideally, those would be unified. We're just not there yet. So I would say, give us feedback, let us know how we're doing, but know that we are paying attention to the public source repository and that we want to be doing more work there. It's just going to probably take us a little while process-wise to really unify some of this stuff. And unfortunately, some of it we just can't unify because of the different delivery vehicles that we have, some of which are Microsoft internal only, and we have to kind of tease those apart so that we can continue to serve our first-party partners as well as you folks publicly, right? And so the idea is that anything that can be done publicly, we're going to continue to try and shift it public, but that's just going to take some process time for us to do. We're just not there yet. So I guess the TLDR is sorry for the dust. Pardon our construction, but know that we are looking into the public repo and the public issues, and we're going to hopefully start, doing a better job tracking that work and communicating with you all. I think we do feel bad the degree to which some of those public comments have gone unaddressed or not answered, and that's something we want to get better at. Largely, I'll say it's while there are process and technical issues, it's also a cultural thing, and something that we're working on getting better at inside the team. As always, this is a big Q&A, so feel free to ask questions. You can unmute, you can type stuff in the chat, you can point me to your blog where you rant about something that we screwed up. Any and all feedback is welcome. Just fire away. That sort of feedback and those sorts of questions are things that we always appreciate, and that it's good for those of us from the team to see those questions, because it lets us know what's top of mind for you all. So, if there are features that don't work the way that you would expect, or, comments on the process issues that we've been having, those are all fair game, as well as, just I use this API and I don't understand what it's for, or what features are you working on next. I can also update folks with kind of a roadmap and plan as a part of this. I think we have some questions. Let's see. Oh, Greg asked, yeah, a lot of unanswered issues. It looks like the product is losing support. Yeah. Greg, tend to want to do things as a scrub. I want to make sure that everything is assigned, and that, if possible, there is an answer. Since we are behind, what I think practically might happen is that a lot of them are going to be comments saying, hey, we can't repro this, or we need more information. And then hopefully the original commenter will come back and say, I've been able to repro it on a recent release, or I haven't been able to repro it on a recent release, or here's some more information that'll help you answer it, or here's traces, or I actually solved this with a support ticket, or whatever. That process is going to take some time. I would also totally understand if people were frustrated at the lack of response, and when we try to engage, don't come back, or don't engage, or have wandered off and done something else, or solved it on their own. And so ideally, kind of, I want to engage with everybody who's still present and interested, but it's possible that we won't be able to get repros, or people will not be able to provide information, or will have decided to go do something else. And that's a loss, right? I'm not pleased with that, but it is reasonable and quite possible. So I don't think we'll probably solve everything, but my goal is at least to, activate each issue and kind of say, hey, here's our conclusion, or here's our call, or we need more information. And then if things are still stale, or the original poster doesn't come back, then it probably gets closed and left there, and with a note saying, hey, if anybody else sees this or has a comment, just reactivate stuff. So that's probably how we'll do it. Right now, the trick is I want the source updated so that people are talking about, the product as it currently exists. And we're working on ways to get the engineering team, not just the program management team, more engaged. And this, of course, would be super easy to do if development were just in the open, if we were doing all of our mainline work on the public source. That's more of a process thing that we're not there yet. And we have some refactoring and stuff still to do to make that more feasible. It is a goal. So the engineering org and the PM org agree that that's something that we kind of want to do. But it's, always a matter of prioritization. Do we invest in the work to move our systems and tools to the public repo so we can do work there, or what's blocking us from doing that? It is something that everyone agrees is the right thing to do. It's just a matter of actually doing the work, and that's the thing that we've consistently lagged on doing. So I think the main thing I can say is that I'm sorry, and that we're committed to try and doing better. And hopefully we can reply to everything and work with folks who are still engaged to get to resolutions on stuff. We've done that before when we were doing source drops more frequently, we were more engaged. But there were also times where we'd kind of like space out for a little while and then come back and have to do one of these scrubs. So hopefully we'll get the time and energy to do one of those soon. I do know that more engineers are looking at the GitHub forums than were previously. We just need to formalize it and get more eyes and more time in, particularly so that if there are good bugs or issues reported, that we can figure out a low cost for us way of tracking that in the central repository where we track everything else and communicate back when stuff is actually done. That part is not automated today, and that's been one of the big barriers. So hopefully that answers the question, and it's something that I think we want to do better. Very clearly, there is a community and there are people still engaged. And you're right that I think it's unfortunate that this gives the impression that we're not doing work or that there aren't engaged people. And that's something that we want to try and fix. Okay.
All right, thanks, Matt. I'll go ahead and set up the next one here. It looks like Tyler's asking, for deploying containers, we currently preload the images on our nodes to avoid very long times. Is there a better approach to this?
I don't know how you're doing the preload. There is a command in SF, which I think is like, it's something about deployed code package. Like you can front load code packages onto machines, and that should also trigger the container download. If you're doing it by hand, I would recommend probably not, and using the SF mechanism to kind of warm things up. That said, there isn't a better answer than that. Especially with Windows containers, they do tend to be quite large. The only thing that I can suggest, other than explicitly preloading stuff, is look into, if they're your containers, look into the layering and see if there are things that you can do to make the common layer between multiple containers shareable or more common, so that you're not re-downloading it for every single image, right? If you've got a base which is the same for many different workloads, then making sure that that's an independent layer that is shared across all those containers will help, because then at least you only have to do it once. And if you pull down container A, then pulling down container B is really only about some thin shim delta on top, rather than downloading the whole thing again. Other than that, though, there's not a lot of great art out there. This is a thing that we struggle with even for the internal, container systems in Microsoft, is how do we, given that we don't even control the layering, right? They're your containers. How do we efficiently pull down container images and layers for services like, functions or ACI? It's a area of investment and work to try and make that as efficient as possible. Unfortunately, since, in contrast to normal service fabric services where everything is contained in that package, the container world operates off of these hubs. And so that download is just kind of a presumed step that has to happen. And so there have been some efforts to enforce that or improve that. I think one of the ones that we talked about was Project Teleport. If you look up Microsoft Project Teleport, you might see, I think it was probably late last year, I don't know exactly when, where we talked about some of the stuff that we're doing to try and make container activation faster. But I would say that it's not a solved problem. And it is kind of inherent in this hub model. That said, even with large traditional service fabric packages, we saw customers whose activation time was, it was sensitive, and they wanted to try and speed it up. And that's why that preload command does exist as a first-class thing in the platform. So in the meantime, until the industry or Microsoft figures out a good way of solving this that avoids kind of that hub pull down time, looking into that preload command is the best thing that we can offer.
Just to add something, Tyler, this is like a pretty like industry standard way of doing things as well. Like regardless of whether or not you were running with Service Fabric or not, if you were to deploy containers and you want to ensure, the fastest possible container deployment time that you can get, pre-caching or caching the image on the node on which you'll be doing that deployment is just the thing that people do. And so, to your point on, is there a better approach to this? I would say like today, not really. And even if you look at like options like the project that Matt was describing with like teleport and stuff, the ROI on those things as a consumer where you're fully in control of the image set that you need to deploy and you can architect a solution for it, I would say it's extremely questionable for you to look at like experimental solutions to this problem when you can just get away by pre-caching, given that you have deterministic control over the images that need to be in a certain place at a certain point in time. And so I would actually recommend that you continue to use this in this way, and you will likely see greater success and faster deployment times consistently over time as compared to some of the more experimental stuff that's happening today. And if you have any specific further questions on that, please, feel free to follow up in chat, or you can shoot me or Matt a message, no problem. But I would generally say, yes, you're going about this the right way, and I hope you continue to.
Yeah, I'm trying to find maybe deep. I guess we'll see what the next question is, but we should find the pre-download API and send that out as well for anybody else running into this.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. All right. The next question is from Tejas. Is deploying to LCOW Linux containers on Windows Server 2019 on the roadmap?
It is, but it's got an asterisk next to it, which is that it's largely not under control of the Service Fabric team. We need work from the Windows org to enable that as a first-class scenario. And until they ship something that we can use publicly, it doesn't exist. And it's not entirely clear whether or not the Windows cosign container org is ready or planning to do that anytime soon. They have some technology for this, and Microsoft has talked about enabling Linux containers previously. There's been work from Docker Inc. kind of before it got charted off, where this was a scenario that they were also focused on, but it's not entirely clear how it would work today or how to get it as a supported functionality from Windows. So we're kind of talking with them, that org, about how to enable that scenario. It's something certainly that I would love to see. And it's something that the Service Fabric team is definitely interested in. But we do need that work from our partners. It's not something that we can do on our own. And that part of it is where we're kind of running up against some strategic or planning difficulties. So again, yes, I want it. Multiple partners want it. Different teams in Microsoft want it. And currently it's an asterisk until we can solve some of those other structural issues with the Windows org.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. The next one is from Jason, and the end question is this scenario supported? And there's a GitHub link. The full question is, I have tried to set up a Linux Service Fabric cluster on your Windows developer machine following the instructions provided and was able to get the cluster running. But whenever I deployed a sample application based on containers, when I deploy, it causes the cluster to crash with segfault. And so the question is the scenario supported?
Let me take a quick look. As a Linux container application in Windows. Yeah, I mean, this is probably an example of something that technically might work or technically should work, but doesn't, because we haven't been able to get the full scenario baked through the Windows org. So I would have to, I can and will look at the issue. But generally, Linux containers on Windows as a first-class thing with Service Fabric today isn't there. So Linux containers on Linux, naturally, if you've got an Ubuntu box for your development environment, that should all work. .NET Core and Service Fabric and containers are all supported there. And Windows containers on Windows will work, but it's the combination of Linux containers on Windows, especially in kind of that development environment, that's just not there yet today. It might be close. All of the parts exist, but getting them to work together cleanly is still problematic and not fundamentally supported yet, because of some of the support that we're lacking from the Cosign folks. So like maybe via Docker rather than via Windows's built-in primitives, but I haven't seen it work end-to-end yet. And I know that we're missing some functionality and certainly missing some supported scenarios. So I'm kind of, I would say I'm happy and somewhat impressed that you've gotten as far as you have, and we might be able to get you over the last mile there, but fundamentally today it's going to be rough, and it's not fully supported at this time, and that's something that kind of in line with the last question is what we want to try and resolve.
All right, thanks, Matt. The next one is from Whit. Can the reverse proxy be configured to listen to both HTTP and HTTPS?
I think it's only one, but we can follow up and check. I know we had discussions about it internally, and I know that, for example, the proxy can take in HTTP and then emit HTTPS into another service, so it can act as kind of that trusted subsystem. But I don't know if it can literally listen on both. That might be something that we can look into. The one I know, hold on, let me see if my search history gives me what I want. There is this page. I haven't gone through it to see if your question is answered there, but that would be where in the docs I would go to look, and we can follow up and see if that's actually.
Sure. Yeah, for the most part, it looked to me as though if you add that little section with the secure stuff to the ARM template, it enables HTTPS. If you remove it, it falls back to HTTP. So
Right.
I was looking for more. Okay, that's great. Can you do kind of both? So I guess I'm kind of trying to abuse the new application gateway to try and use that in a way that's not wanting to.
Maybe a little bit. I mean, I know that a long time ago when we were first putting it out there, we had a big discussion around the truth table, right, around what it should accept and emit. But all of those were, in configuration A, I take in A and B, or I take in only B, and I emit only A or only B. It was not, I don't recall any conversation about ands, right? If it comes in as HTTP or HTTPS. I don't recall a conversation about that, so I don't know if it's supported today.
Okay.
I will say what I see most people do is the reverse proxy is used mainly for communication within the cluster. And within the cluster, I'm not going to say that this is necessarily best practice or best secure practice, but inside the cluster, people often treat the whole cluster as a trusted or as a trust boundary. And so anything running inside of it may or may not be, secured with communicating with other services. And so in that case, the proxy runs unsecured and the services are communicating with each other over just HTTP. but where you get the boundary is when it's coming in from the internet or other systems. So you'd go through something like App Gateway or Azure API Management or something like that, and that's where you do your HTTPS and SSL termination. Again, not necessarily saying that that's the best, and
unfortunately, unfortunately, that's the route that I've wound up having to go look at.
Yeah.
Is just because I've got all the different HTTPS calls coming into the app gateway, but I want to use the reverse proxy to then source them to the right place.
Yeah.
And of course, can't do HTTPS on localhost, and so switched to just HTTP, and of course, I can do the offloading and handle that. But I was previously using HTTPS so that I could access it locally and just use an NSG to filter by IP address.
Yes.
For who could access it. So, you know, as a result, I've had to completely eliminate that so that I can support the app gateway approach.
Yeah, that's something that other people have run into, and I think is fair feedback. So we'll try and confirm this for you.
Sure.
And I think you have my email, but if you don't,
sure do.
I'll just dump it in. If I don't get an answer back to you in a reasonable time frame, feel free to send me mail, and we can confirm.
Thank you.
All right, great. I think the next one is from, forgive the pronunciation, Sippy. The question is, new version of Microsoft.visualstudio.azure.fabric.ms build 1.7.0 is released. Is there a release note somewhere?
That's a great question. I've actually gotten this question multiple times, and I'm following up with the Visual Studio folks and the tools team to get them to publish that somewhere, hopefully. Ideally, it should be on the NuGet page or on their own GitHub page, but they don't have anything there today. I will say that I don't know of anything major that they changed. It's probably just a few minor bug fixes, and that it is not required. It should continue to work. The prior version should continue to work, but that's a good call out and something that we need to get better at. But yeah, the Visual Studio Tools folks are aware and are trying to provide an answer.
Actually, when you upgrade to that version, it is so Visual Studio is actually rolling it back to the previous version. So that's why I specifically asked that one.
Yeah. I wonder if there's some other package that has a dependency explicitly on a prior version then. If you have a repro of that and want to open it up as a GitHub issue, or just send it to me in mail, or send a link to the issue in mail, then I can forward that on as well, and we can try and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
So error message is telling that the project structure is not matching this version. So do you want to downgrade? Something like that. I'll send you the screenshot.
Yeah, that's interesting. There was one fix around previously. They had a bug where if there was I think it was a config or data package that was empty, the tooling was stripping it out unnecessarily rather than just leaving it alone. And I know that that's one of the things that they fixed, but I don't know why that would cause an error. It should be more permissive than it was previously. So that's something maybe worth following up on. We can figure it out. Yeah, so I would say if you got a repro, either open it up as a GitHub issue and send me the link, or just send a description of the repro and the errors that you're getting, and I can loop in the right people.
Sure, thank you.
No problem.
All right, the next question is from Greg, and it's a two-part, and it has some information in there. So, Matt, I might ask you to also take a look. And it says, based on the answer to question 1, I'll write question 2. Question 1 is, to call SF guest exe, we were told via MS support ticket to name the endpoint. Then in the .NET Core app, that we were told to access the environment variable to figure out what port SF is using to host the process. Is that the correct approach?
That should be correct. the main thing that's a little weird is that inside the guest, you're explicitly not using the Service Fabric SDK. So the API that I would normally tell you to use to fetch the endpoint name and port and stuff doesn't exist. And so the environment variable is the way of getting that endpoint information. The reason that you need to name the endpoint is because Service Fabric is, first of all, we need some token to inject that endpoint name, right? It can't just be port. You might have multiple ports. And so we're using that endpoint name kind of as a part of that environment variable token. And then the second thing is that we're using that hint that the endpoint name exists to feed information back to naming so that that address that we assign you is discoverable. Right, so that other services can find it either via DNS or what have you. So what you've described sounds correct, is what I know to work. I guess if you're having any problems with it, maybe let us know.
No, that's working correctly.
Okay.
Just so you know. So just so I don't have to write it out, I'll follow up. So the second question that I have is, we have an application gateway that before, and it's a custom gateway, and I'm dealing with a couple of on-prem clusters. And we're going to take in an HTTP request. We're going to break apart the query string and then do a lookup via the Service Fabric SDK to figure out where to forward that request to.
Mm-hmm.
So in the past, we were looking for empty endpoint names, and we found out that our gateway wouldn't work with named endpoints. So when we call, I believe I just had the code up. I wanted to pull it up. When we call I'll get the correct name here, resolved endpoints or resolved service endpoint object, when we resolve that endpoint, I was curious, are you ever going to have more than one named endpoint? Or are we just limited? We could, right? So
you can have more, or technically you can have none.
Right. So if you don't name it, it just has the default name, and then the key value we're looking for in the JSON response from the resolved service endpoint was a blank name. And now we've hard coded to say, I don't care what you give me, just give me the first response back in that JSON. So we are sort of limited when using a guest executable to having just one, unless we somehow pass, it's just looking up the correct endpoint tends to be challenging from an application gateway perspective.
Yeah, I can see how that would be. As far as I know, there's nothing in the guest.exe model that prevents you from having multiple endpoints. So you would still have name and then value in there in those results. The main thing, but the other things to be aware of are that by default, with the resolve APIs, you only get back the address. I presume it's got to be a stateless thing. You get back, I think, all of the addresses, all of the endpoints for a random instance. Whereas for stateful, we will hand back all of the addresses for the primary. There's a separate API on the resolved service partition, which I think is the thing that you get back from that API. So basically there's get endpoint, and then there's endpoints, which is a collection, which is everything. So if you had 2 endpoints on your service and you had 5 instances of your service, the default will give you the 2 addresses for one of those instances randomly. The other API will give you a list of the 10, right? It could be 2 times 5. So you'd get all 10 back, and then presumably you're doing something fancier around picking which one to forward on to. I'm not aware of anything about guest.exes that says that you can't have more than one. That would be surprising to me. I guess technically it's also possible, just so that you know, it's possible that the get endpoint API returns nothing. that would be a case where the instances are all currently down. For a stateful service, it would be a case where there is no primary currently. You just got unlucky. So in your gateway, if you're doing these resolve calls, just be aware that those are also cases that you have to code against.
I guess I wasn't aware also, as you said, that it's random. I was hoping that the resolved call would give you the application endpoint that was on doing some sort of health check to say, hey, use this one because it's the node with the least, no.
Today, Service Fabric doesn't use health for much. The thing we use health for is, of course, painting Service Fabric Explorer, so you get nice red errors when things are in error, and for driving the rolling upgrades. Some of that is changing. I think I mentioned earlier the kind of health and readiness probes that exist. There's also functionality that we shipped in the last release around draining requests. So we're probing stuff and kind of taking addresses out of naming when we're shutting things down in a controlled fashion. So we are baking knowledge of health into more things, but it is not really broadly used today. And so the results that you get back are effectively random. It's not going to give you the one that's on your local machine. It's not going to pick the one that's closest. It doesn't do anything smart. It's just a list. It's a lookup table. So if you do want to do something fancier like checking health or explicitly doing round robin or doing some other additional load balancing, that's where that get endpoints address array comes in handy. And then you can make these higher level decisions, or use something like APM, which has a little bit of this baked in, though their controls are also somewhat limited. Trafic is another reverse proxy that also has some controls that you can easily do around weighting and stuff like that.
Thanks.
All right, great. The next one is from Shane. Any update on supporting SDK style projects for .sf project?
No, but God, I wish we did. That's becoming more painful, and we're working with the tooling folks to figure out what is taking so long and what their issues are. I think there's a GitHub issue that we've discussed in prior community calls, where you can see the items that they are blocked on. And I haven't seen any progress on those that I know of. This is something I can bring it up again. And in all honesty, thank you for continuing to ask. I know that this has been something that's been wrong for a while. Every single time you folks ask, it gives me an opportunity to go follow up and say, hey, people are still asking about this. So continue to bring on the feedback. Like, share, and subscribe. Go upvote the issues. I don't have the short links at hand, but I think if you search for this, you will find it as an issue in GitHub, and I would recommend commenting and upvoting stuff there as well. If you can't find it, let me know, and I can either find it and dump it into the chat notes here, or email me and I can find it and reply.
Yeah, great. The next one is from Carl. Do you have documentation or examples on how to run an AZ function inside of a Service Fabric cluster?
We don't, but we should. There was a customer case study, I think it was Zeiss, who talked about how they'd done this. Fundamentally, the functions runtime, most of the people that we see deployed inside of SF just use the containerized version. So there's a container out there that already has the functions runtime inside of it. Most people just deploy that as a container and then use normal Service Fabric capabilities to call functions that might be inside of that. So you have the base container, you add on a layer that is your actual function code, and then you deploy that as a container and then call it. It's a good ask that we should probably have a first class sample for it, given that people do it fairly often. But there's not a tutorial or a demo of it that I'm aware of today.
Got it. So the next one is from Wit, and there's a link in this question. So there's a long-running thread at link on GitHub regarding updating the ASP.NET Core services to use the new iGeneric host that's now the standard approach used in ASP.NET Core since 3.0. There's mostly been work done by the community in there. Is this something on the SF roadmap to support in ASP.NET Core and the other stateful/stateless services?
Yeah. So it is something that we want to support. Frankly, one of the things that we are struggling with is that many of our partners are still on full framework, or they're on other lower versions of .NET Core, like 2.1. So we can't just switch. So we're trying to figure out a way to support that maybe as a separate package.
To what extent could you just offer that as, you have the stateless and stateful service, and you have the ASP.NET Core stateful and stateful service?
Right.
To what extent could you just offer that as the stateful and stateless iGeneric host services?
Right. Well, that would be shipping an update to the VS templates. What we're trying to talk about is if you go to the NuGet packages, which is like Microsoft.ServiceFabric.ASP.NET Core, that integration, we want to offer a different version of that package that integrates via generic host versus the middleware stuff that we have today.
Sure. I guess what I'm saying is if especially if you have a lot of customers that are stuck on the old one, because I don't know how you can necessarily introduce that not as a breaking change.
Yeah.
Could you not just have the two different approaches running side by side, sort of like how ASP.NET Core does have today?
You could. And that's what we're looking into. It's more about making sure that in our build and release pipeline that we can build those packages separately and release them separately without accidentally forcing everyone to 3.1.
Sure.
And that's mainly a tooling and organization problem on our end. It's not a technical problem.
Is there any timeline on how that's coming along? Where unfortunately there's a lot of packages that are increasingly adopting the new style.
Yeah.
So we're like AutoFac does not care for the old style anymore.
Yeah. There isn't a timeline at this point. I can say that we have recently gotten to a point where we can build targeting .NET Core 3.1. So we now have the ability to produce a package that is bound to that version of .NET Core. But we haven't gone through and done the work either of updating all of the packages explicitly to support that version, nor taking this change and incorporating it as a separate package and figuring out how to release that. It's probably not as much work as we feel like it is, so we're probably slower about it than we should be. But it is something that we're slowly getting closer to being able to do. I guess like the only thing I can offer as an option in the meantime is just do what it's doing in the PR, right? I mean, like it's good code, it'll work. Service Fabric doesn't care, right? It's just some exe or some service, anything that conforms to the derives from stateful or stateless service or as a guest exe or a container. All of those things will work. It's just that you won't be using the formal Service Fabric ASP.NET integration package. You'll have done something custom. The good news is Service Fabric won't care. It just looks a little weird and it feels more manual than it should be. But that's the only way out in the meantime.
Fair enough.
All right, we're running low on time, so I think we will lightning round these as quickly as possible here. And apologies again for getting a bit of a late start this week.
Yeah, do you want to go for it, Matt?
Yeah, I'll just run the gauntlet. Let's give it a shot. Still best practice call thread sleep, timeout infinite. Yep, that's currently the best thing we know of. Async main might work. I haven't tried it yet. But the goal with the thread sleep is, of course, to prevent your process from exiting, and also to prevent the main Fabric client there from getting GC'd. I think we've solved the GC issue separately, but I still put a thread sleep in there forever. Either thread sleep or I think a task delay timeout infinite also works. Their plans for an included edge router component. Third-party router is still best. Third-party is still best route. Trafic is still the best answer, and we are working with Continuous to get it updated to get a plugin that works with the V2 stuff. So that work is in progress. Trafic is the one that I've seen the most success with. There's also YARP, which is the .NET org has put out. You can, I think they say it's either yet another reverse proxy or YARP another reverse proxy, depending on whether you like your algorithms to be sassy or recursive. YARP's another one that we're looking into doing integration with. That also works pretty well. Deep's got a bunch of email. An actual question about YARP, so beat me to it. Excellent. Yeah, we are looking at them as well as another reverse proxy that we want to do integration with. They follow almost exactly the same model as Trafic. Are any available service control mechanism being able to pause, resume a running sync loop? No, we haven't. We've heard this feedback periodically around kind of wanting to sleep a service or delete it, but without actually deleting the service record. Most of the time that we've seen this request, just deleting the service and then recreating it later has worked. If that doesn't work, or if there's something else that you're interested in solving, or some scenario that isn't covered there, I would say let me know. Give me feedback. My email's a little bit further up from there, and tell me what about create delete when you want to shut something down doesn't work, right? I'm fully aware that there are scenarios that it doesn't work for. I'm just curious what yours is, and we can follow up from there. Request some documentation or samples on the underlying replicator. We want to use the HA without using reliable collections. Replicate some data streams directly. I mean, if it's a stream, then the underlying replicator isn't going to work either. It's inherently chunky. It replicates these byte arrays, basically. I don't know if that's good enough or not. If you really want to go down this route, get in contact with me, and I can help. But I think we'd also like to know what about the collections explicitly doesn't work. We've been doing a lot of work on the collections to make them more useful in more scenarios. And so if it's a latency thing or a performance thing or anything like that, even if it's just like the API form, like dictionaries don't make sense or queues don't work, that's good feedback for us. Any updates around the scheduler? No, but I have some example code, kind of one that I built. It's not really a scheduler so much as it is a service pool manager, but you might be able to repurpose it. Send me mail and I'll put you on the GitHub repo. If an actor schedules long-running reminder and is upgraded with a reminder fail, fire post upgrade. The way that the reminders work is that it's implemented on a timer. It's just a .NET timer under the hood. So it will fire after the upgrade, but it might be up to the reminder interval before it does. Yeah, made your own communication listener. This is what a lot of people end up doing. I mean, pro, that's why we made the communication listener chunk pluggable. Con, sorry. It would be better if we had this stuff first class. Yeah, using the older packages are indeed a pain. All right, whew, did it. I think. Thank you all for coming. It was good to chat with y'all. If there are any other questions, or if I promised you to, if I promised I would follow up with something and then don't, you have my mail. Please send me hate mail, send me questions, and we'll see you in next month's Q&A.
Yep, spot on. And just mini plug for the ACP. Keep your questions and feedback coming in the group as well. And then, yeah, keep on joining on the webcast. We're happy to have you here. And thanks again, Matt, as always.
No problem. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.